Good afternoon and welcome here. I'm Deborah Posega Osborne, Vice President, University Relations at the University of Saskatchewan. I know many of you in the room. I'm delighted to see all of you here today, and just really grateful for the support you always give this university and for the opportunity this afternoon and early into the evening here for us to get a chance to get together and talk about and hear some words of wisdom about some topics that are very important to us for sure. Just so that you know, those of us when we're speaking, we will take our masks off when we're speaking, which is according to the protocol, and then we'll put them back on immediately. Just want you to know that and all feel comfortable where you are and in this space here. And again, glad to have you here. We have a large group of people joining us online tonight, for which we're very grateful. Those of us who are in the room today in this beautiful space at the USask Calgary Hub are situated on Treaty 7 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And certainly we pay our respects to those who came before us on this land. And I know there are many people tuning in this afternoon who are in other places in Canada and elsewhere. And I'd like to invite you just take a moment silently, acknowledge where you are tonight and those who might have passed by there before you and pay them their respects. Thank you very much for doing that. So here we are in the Calgary Hub. Calgary, as some of you may know, is home to more than 10,000 University of Saskatchewan alumni, 10,000 University of Saskatchewan alumni who live in and around this city. That's more alumni concentrated in one place outside of Saskatoon than anywhere on the planet. It's just great to see the success and to stay in touch with all of you and understand how your careers have changed and your lives have changed based on the time you spent at the University of Saskatchewan. I do want to mention a couple of alumni here tonight who might be known to you. First of all, our Chancellor, Britt McCreath, is here. Chancellor McCreath, that is well-deserved applause. We're always grateful for the Chancellor's, the time and the energy she brings to her position. She's here tonight with her husband, Scott, and the two of them are great advocates and a real force behind this university. And so we're grateful to have you here today. There are a couple members of our Alumni Advisory Board here tonight. I like to say that this university can only be the best it can be with the help of its alumni. And we had Deidre Horn and Tracy Youngworth both here tonight, and we're grateful for you. And I want to thank you for your service to the university and for keeping us the best university we can be and the time that you bring to that. For those of you who are in the room and those of you who can see the room online, this is a special place for us, this USask Calgary Hub. It was created really with the intention of uniting this powerful alumni base that we have here in Calgary, and finding space for you to gather and work together and grow together and be together in a way that is really special to University of Saskatchewan alumni. It's also a space where we can come, those of us who are actively working on behalf of the university, and make connections with business and industry, with other institutions in the city, and make those kind of connections that help this university grow and thrive, and will do so far into the future. There's actually a lot we can accomplish here together. If you've had a chance to take a look around, you'll see that there's meeting rooms, gathering spaces, sort of little drop-in spots where you can come to either find space to work for yourself or participate in educational events and other activities that we will be scheduling in the space, various kinds of programming in the year ahead, and we'll be keeping in touch with you to let you know what that programming looks like. So if you're here downtown and you're looking for a space, you want to get together with fellow alumni, you want to just find a quiet place to do a little bit of work for a little bit of time, this is your space. You're welcome here. And please stay in touch with us and drop in when you can and let us know what we can do for you while you're in this space. So about that conversation I was telling you about, we're very excited to be here tonight to have this conversation with you and very pleased to have our guest speaker and our moderator. You're going to hear about some research initiatives happening at the University of Saskatchewan that are addressing some of the biggest challenges that are facing modern society. And we are addressing those challenges in ways that leverage the many strengths of this university, and there are many strengths at this university. We're leading in research on some of the most critical issues of our time: water and food security, sustainable agricultural technologies, the health of people, animals, and the environment. We have a firm commitment as well, as you know, to indigenization and reconciliation. These are areas where this university is doing some of the most important work in Canada and in the world. Now, in particular, since the emergence of COVID-19, the need for infectious disease research has never been more important. Today, you're going to hear from Dr. Volker Gertz, Director and CEO of VIDO, the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Gertz and his team were the first in the country to isolate the COVID-19 virus and to have a vaccine candidate in pre-testing. Now, even as they do that, they're focused on predicting future pandemics and combating emerging diseases. And VIDO is positioned to do just that, to become Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research. At this time, I would like to turn this microphone over to my colleague, Dr. Baljit Singh, who is our Vice President Research at University of Saskatchewan, and he will introduce you to Dr. Gertz.
Calgary has been my home since summer of 2016, when University of Saskatchewan traded me over to University of Calgary for some undisclosed sum of money. And 4.5 years later, Calgary said enough. They traded me back to Saskatchewan. So I began there in my current role in February, and I'm very delighted to have friendships in both the places and be able to do some collaborative work between two great provinces and two outstanding universities, because the problems that we are looking at, they do not stop at provincial boundaries. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity to have friends in both the cities and both the places. Dr. Volker Gertz is a dear friend and an outstanding leader that we have. Volker grew up in Germany. He did his veterinary degree and a PhD in Germany before coming to University of Saskatchewan, to the organization that he currently leads. After doing some training, he went back to Germany for a short period of time, and then he came back to be a scientist, then associate director, now the director and the CEO of VIDO. Him and I began our careers nearly at the same time in Saskatchewan, so we developed friendship and joint projects over the years. So it gives me nothing but immense pride to see him leading this massive effort at VIDO on behalf of all the Canadians. Actually, if you really look at the impact of the work that his team does, it's on behalf of the global populations fighting against the scourge of COVID-19 pandemic. There are many new developments taking place at VIDO, and that gives us an opportunity to hear directly from Dr. Volker Gertz. I'm going to pass the floor to him, and so that we can listen as to what's new at VIDO. Then we will follow up with more discussion after his presentation. So thank you so very much for coming in to attend today. And thank you to all those who are joining us online. And your presence means a lot to him and to me and to everybody at University of Saskatchewan. Thank you very much. Volker, over to you.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight. So what I wanted to tell you is all the exciting stuff, as you just heard in the introduction, that we're doing at the university in preparing for the next pandemic, but also dealing with this one that's still going on, and we shouldn't be forgetting it. We are probably seeing, I hope not, another wave, and we may be seeing some variants in the future. And VIDO is helping all of us, as we just heard, in controlling some of the impact of that. So really what I'm trying to talk about tonight is how do we prepare for a pandemic, tell you a little bit about the work that we are currently doing at the university, and how in the future we will be even much better prepared in dealing with the next disease, whether it's a human disease or an animal disease. And so for those of you that may not be familiar with VIDO, we are a research center on campus. We're on the north end of campus, and if you drive by our facility, it's this really large building, and that is one of the world's largest containment facilities And I'll show you on the next slide what it actually looks like. We have scientists from more than 25 countries there. It's a really, really cool place to work. People from all over the world. You can see we have 45 plus PhD level scientists. We're now over 160 staff members. We developed a number of vaccines over the years, all of them animal vaccines, but we now have a number of human vaccines that are moving forward into clinical development. But most importantly on this slide is probably the one on top here. We have over $200 million right now in biocontainment infrastructure. And what does that mean? That means we have the capacity to work with these potentially dangerous pathogens. There's not too many places in the world that have that capacity. The University of Saskatchewan is one of them. So we have not only Canada's, but one of the world's largest. In fact, it ranks amongst the top 3 facilities right now that allows us to work with these dangerous pathogens. And that's called the International Vaccine Center, as you see here. This is one of 10 major science infrastructures in Canada, and it's 60% of its operating is funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation. So this is what we call a level 3 facility. And so you can categorize pathogens. The level 1s are the lowest, what we use in our kitchen, yeast when we bake bread or make beer. The level 2s are the ones that we encounter in the hospitals, the common colds. Level 3 are the ones that are potentially then deadly for the individual who's getting them or who's working with them. HIV, tuberculosis, but now also COVID-19. And then there is the highest level, the level 4, and that's the Ebola viruses of the world. And Canada only has one facility, the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. And there is only a few, about a dozen facilities around the whole world. Now, we are now upgrading 10% of our containment space to even the highest level, to level 4, becoming one of the few facilities in the world that can work with these pathogens in the future and respond to any new pathogen, whether it's a human pathogen or an animal pathogen. And so this facility enables us to work with animals, and animals are needed in our line of research because it's the step before you go into humans. Before we develop a vaccine or a drug to use in humans, you show proof of concept in animals. But it's critical that you work with these animals, like large animals like bison, for example, or pigs, that closely resemble humans, so that when we develop vaccines, we know they will actually work in humans. And so you can see this facility is equipped from handling bison. We just finished a study. Bison have TB, just like humans have, and cattle have. And if you recall, southern Alberta and southern Saskatchewan had a TB outbreak a few years ago, which almost cost us our reputation in the world of being TB-free as a country. So it's important that we do work on these animals and prevent the disease spilling over from bison into cattle. But then you can see we can also work with bats in this facility. And as you know now from the news, bats are those species that for whatever reason have all these viruses, which then from time to time spill over into other species, whether it's humans or, as it was the case with COVID, first into an intermediate host and from there into humans. So you need to have these facilities that allow you to work with these pathogens and that allow you to work with all these different animal species. And that's what we're doing. And so Vito is very fortunate to have an international board of directors. You can see the chair of our board, Ryan Thompson, one of Canada's largest beef producers in the country. Our vice chair, Amy Croman, one of Canada's largest pork producers in the country. So our grassroots remain in the animal health sector, but we also have lots of members representing the human health. Craig Vanderwagen, Rear Admiral in the US public health system, now retired. He was assistant secretary in the Obama government. Jeremy Gowler from Sandoz. Rory McAlpine, vice president, former vice president with Maple Leaf Foods. Tippy Mark with Johnson & Johnson. So you can see a whole bunch of international people from all around the world representing both the human and the animal health industry. And so if I would just put in one slide what Vito does, that's shown here. So we focus on understanding diseases. So when COVID hit, almost daily people would phone and ask, what about my cats? What about my dogs? What about my pigs? What about my cattle? Can I go in the barn and see my animals and so on? So early on, when everybody needs to understand What is a new disease? What are the symptoms? How is it being transmitted? Where does it live? All those questions need to be addressed, and you need to have facilities like this to do this. But then we are always focused on developing solutions for it, right? If we don't stop at just understanding the disease, we're also working on making vaccines. And so, as you know, and just heard in the introduction, Vito has now its own COVID-19 vaccine, which is moving forward. And I'll have some exciting announcement there at the end. Contract research. Just during the pandemic alone, we worked with more than 100 companies from all over the world who came to Vito to test or have us test their technologies, their vaccines, their drugs, and their therapeutics. So not only were we working on our own, but we were also out trying to help others in developing theirs. And then lastly, of course, training as a university organization is critical for us. And in fact, Canada not only lacks manufacturing capacity, and we all seen this now with the pandemic, but we also lack capacity to do this critical research. And so training the next generation of researchers is critical for Canada to be not reliant on other countries to do the work for us, to be domestically sufficient in making these vaccines ourselves. And so you can see we work on a number of diseases, so not only COVID-19, we traditionally have worked on animal health diseases, human diseases, but also wildlife diseases. But it's really the interface where these diseases spill over from humans into animals or animals into humans. That's where Vito has its strengths. And so that's exactly what we're building now with becoming Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research, the ability to operate in this interface. And so here are some of the vaccines that Vito developed over the years. And you can see, even for animal vaccines, the economic impact is easily in the billions of dollars. And some of these vaccines, some of you I know are veterinarians, some of these vaccines, when they came out, were real game changers, taking care of scours in calves, for example, and other diseases. And you can see on the bottom now, we now have 2 human vaccines that are already in clinical trials or are about to go into clinical trials. And so over the last 5 years alone, Vito developed 2 new vaccines. We have now our COVID vaccine that is in clinical trials. We worked with more than 250 global users all around the world coming to us and asking us for expertise, engaged with more than 200 companies, made more than 1,000 publications and presentations, and even received now 5 awards for the technologies that were developed at Vito. And so the next slide just shows you some of the examples of the companies, and you may recognize some of these names. We essentially have worked with every large animal health company and many of the human health companies that are out there. But when the pandemic hit, Vito was the first organization in Canada to respond to it. We were the first to isolate the virus, as you heard earlier, and that was done from the first Canadian case, an individual in Toronto. Nasal swabs were taken at the Sunnybrook Health Center. They were sent to our colleagues at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. They then sent it to us for us to isolate the virus, and then we sent it back to them, and from there into every diagnostic lab in the country. We were the first in Canada to have an animal model established. And as I said, it's critical to have an animal model for you to test something that eventually goes into humans. And we are now the first university in Canada that has a vaccine that is in clinical trials. And as I said, we engaged with more than 100 different organizations from all around the world. And you can see where they're coming from all around the world to work with us on developing solutions for COVID-19. And in fact, many, not many, but some of the technologies that we tested are now out there as authorized vaccines. So for those vaccines that are available right now, some of them were tested at Vito, and some of the drugs and therapeutics were tested at Vito. But it's not only the international collaborators. We had, as you can see here, many collaborators on campus, experts that have scientific expertise in various areas. And you can see we collaborated effectively, not only with researchers at the University of Saskatchewan, but essentially all or many of the key universities in the country, plus the government facilities, for example, the NML in Winnipeg and others. And so our own vaccine right now, what we're developing is what is called a protein subunit vaccine. And so Novavax is now the only company in the world right now that has a protein subunit vaccine in development and that may become available soon to Canadians. It is the proven technology of vaccines. Those are the vaccines that all of you have received when you travel. So hepatitis B, for example, and protein subunit vaccines are the ones that we're giving to our children every day. So the pertussis, diphtheria, tetanus, all these vaccines are protein subunit vaccines. And they not only have decades of a proven safety record, but they're also easy to manufacture, easy to store, and easy to handle. So if you want to get a vaccine to remote northern Saskatchewan or northern Alberta, or in the middle of Africa, this is the technology that we need to use. You can't afford to have ultra low freezers like we require for the RNA vaccines. And so we have now started our clinical trials, as you might have seen in the news, and we actually finding that the vaccine is not only safe, as we were hoping for, but it's also giving us excellent immune responses. So the results from the clinical trials that have come in, and they're showing that the responses that we're seeing in these individuals are just as good as the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccines out there. And again, we're not seeing any adverse reactions. And most importantly, of all the different variants, it's the Delta variant that our vaccine protects the most against, and that's very, very encouraging for us. So our next steps for our vaccine is really to do two things. On the one hand, we're gonna test it as a booster for Canadians, because all of us, or at least the people who wanted to be vaccinated, have been vaccinated now, but we'll probably have to vaccinate every year. And so Vito's vaccine would be an ideal booster because proteins are ideal boosters to other technologies. But beyond that, we're also making this vaccine now available for Africa. And so in fact, our next clinical trial is happening in Uganda. And their current access to vaccines is less than 5%. So in contrast to Canada, where everybody who wanted could have had now the vaccine, there's many, many countries in this world that don't have access to it. And so this is an important part of our vision, providing these technologies to low and middle income countries around the world. But then we didn't only work on vaccines. Here's another little example. It may sound now in hindsight not that meaningful, but in the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was worried that we wouldn't have enough N95 masks, right? And if you remember, there was bought millions of them from China and then they were defect and so on, right? And so we had come across a publication early on in the pandemic out of Purdue University in the US, where they had used an approach using vaporous hydrogen peroxide, it's a gas, to decontaminate equipment, PPE. And so we developed a process using our own facility where we actually use VHP, vaporous hydrogen peroxide, to decontaminate our equipment. And so you can see here, this sounds a little self-made. And in fact, all these chains were bought at Canadian Tire, but you can see our students hanging all these individual masks. So when you use a gas, they can't touch each other. So they had to individually hang them. Every week they would go in for hours at a time and hang thousands of masks, decontaminate them, collect them all, and send them back to the hospitals. And until about 3 months ago, we kept doing this throughout the whole pandemic. So the masks were collected in the ORs, they were shipped to us, we decontaminated them, shipped them back, and so they're stored as a reserve in the hospitals in Saskatchewan. But I think the key of this was that, again, we were the first to look at this and say, yes, we can do this. And so we worked with a ministry in Regina and Health Canada to get this process established. And then Edmonton followed, and then Calgary followed, and then Toronto followed, and so on. And now it's being used in many, many cities around the country. And it just shows you that, you know, it helps in working closely with the communities and making our facility and our expertise available to our communities. But of course, we also learned the hard lessons during the pandemic, and that was that staff quickly burns out. If you have to work on level 3, it means you're wearing essentially a PAPR, a helmet over your face, you're completely packed up, you wear a respiratory unit on the back, you cannot drink a coffee, you cannot eat, you cannot go to the bathroom. So our individuals, our technicians, our scientists would be going into these labs, work 5 to 6 hours in a row, then leave, go out, and either go home because they were exhausted or eat something and go back in. Now, going in and out sounds easy, but it takes about half an hour because you have to shower multiple times on the way out, completely change your clothes and so on, because when you work in containment, you cannot take any of these viruses out with you, right? And so that's the biggest challenge. Recruitment. Right in the pandemic, we said we need more people, we need more people. Well, it takes about 6 months from finding a person to have them fully trained that they're comfortable with working with a potentially deadly virus, right? And so this is another important lesson for us as a country. We cannot look for firefighters when the fire is burning. We have to have them trained and ready to go when the fire starts. And so this is an important lesson for us, I think for all of us, to be able to do this in the future. And so you can see public outreach. I mean, we've given more than 600 media interviews, documentaries, and so on to talk about the exciting work that's happening at the university. And part of what I want to show you here on this slide here now. It's really how can we prepare or be better prepared for the next disease? And so while everybody is focusing, rightfully so, on COVID-19, I just want to point to this little news clip on the right here. This is Bloomberg News from, I think, September or October of last year. So in the middle of the pandemic, talking about a disease of pigs. Now, why is that relevant? Because that disease called African swine fever made its way into Germany, Europe's largest pork producer. And so the disease is right now circulating in China, in Thailand, in Cambodia, Korea, Vietnam. It wiped out essentially the Chinese pig industry, which is good for Canada because we ship now pigs to China, make a lot of money. But this news clip here shows that it's made its way into Germany. And Germany has an industry that is very similar to the Canadian industry. So it's just a matter of time for this disease to show up in Canada. When it does, the impact of it will be billions of dollars again. And in this case, because other countries will be closing their borders for Canadian products. That's the major impact of this disease. Once we have it, our trade partners will stop importing Canadian pork from us. And so again, we're talking about potentially $20 to $25 billion in impact just because of an animal disease for which at the moment we don't have a vaccine or a drug available. And Vito, again, is one of a handful in this case now, a handful of facilities in the world that is allowed to work with this disease because of the infrastructure we have. And so for months now, we've been talking to government, convincing them that for Canada to be able to respond to whatever next disease comes, we have to have special centers in the country that can focus on these emerging diseases, whether they're animal or human diseases, that have the containment infrastructure to safely work with these pathogens, that have the expertise, your firefighters, and also have the ability to quickly make vaccines to control them. And so this is where we see our vision for Vito to become Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research, as we already are building, and I'll show you a slide of it, a manufacturing facility. We have the country's largest containment infrastructure. We now have received money to build a new animal facility. And as I mentioned earlier, we are about to upgrade our containment. And so the vision is really for us to become Canada's leading institute for emerging diseases, being able to rapidly respond to any new disease, whether it's an animal or human disease. And because we can do everything from early discovery all the way into manufacturing, being able to quickly come up with solutions for it. And so you can see on the next slides, we were fortunate over the last year and a half to get about $140 million already from all levels of government, from research funders, but also from private donors now to allow us what we're doing. So not only our COVID-19 research, but also make our vaccine, build a manufacturing facility, and now the newest is to establish Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research. And that is really an investment, a building for the future. And so this is how a manufacturing facility may look like. These are pictures stolen from the internet, but this is more or less exactly what we're building there now. You can see these very, very clean facilities that you have because you have to make sure that nothing gets into your vials, that you don't contaminate it with anything. And then you use what is called stainless steel reactors, as you can see up there, and then single-use systems. So large plastic bags that have all the ingredients for your soup in them already. You put them in these reactors and you grow your vaccine for about a month. And after that, you harvest it all, you purify it, and then eventually you put it into these glass vials. Well, that sounds all very simple, but it's a highly, highly sophisticated, very highly regulated process. And so we're happy now that our construction is about to be completed. We're envisioning to have a grand opening in mid of January to then be able to start our production runs as early as next year. But the next slide is really, I think, more exciting even to me. This is where Vito's direction is going on the science side in the future. And this is really challenging the paradigm of how we make vaccines these days. So the question here really is, why do we have to wait for a new disease to break out before we respond to it? Traditionally, that takes 10 to maybe 15 years. If you throw a lot of money at it, as we did with COVID, we can bring it down to maybe 2 years. But the real question is, why can we not predict what the next pathogen looks like? Make a vaccine for it today for tomorrow's disease. Now that sounds like blue sky right now. That sounds a little crazy here. But I would argue with you that the science is there. The advances we have made in artificial intelligence and bioinformatics are there to help us predict what the next virus, the next pathogen may look like. And if we have the funding available, we can make these vaccines today for tomorrow's diseases. But what we need is facilities that are able to house all these different animal models so that we can make these vaccines. And this is exactly where Vito comes in as Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research. And we started recruiting individuals already. You can see here, Angie Rasmussen from the US, Niraj Dar from Switzerland, two prominent Canadian, Alison Kelvin and Arinjay Banerjee, who just recently joined us in helping us preparing today what tomorrow's disease may look like. The last slide is really talking about the partnerships. When you want to become Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research, you can't do this by yourself. You have to partner with international organizations. And I'm very pleased to give you half of an announcement. We are now partnering with the world's largest organization for epidemic preparedness. It's called CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness. There's a press release that will be coming out in 2 days announcing a multi-million-dollar investment by CEPI into the research that's happening at Vito. And that's very, very exciting about moving forward and helping us to make the vaccines today for tomorrow's diseases. And with that, thank you so much. Thank you for your attention and looking forward to answer your questions.
What an exciting story we have at Vito. To put it in historical perspective, this institute began in 1975 as an organization to develop vaccines. When I was serving as Dean of Veterinary Medicine at University of Calgary, quite often it came to my mind the impact of Vito on the beef production industry in Alberta. Alberta has 1/3 of the beef cost that this country has. So think about the good things that come when we work together and we deal with problems together. Dr. Gertz gave example of African swine fever, which is a threat we are looking at in other countries. Think about what mad cow disease did. We are barely recovering from that now. It was only a few months ago that we were declared a BSE free zone for trading by the World Organization of Animal Health, OIE in Paris. So it takes that long time to recover if we are not prepared ahead of time. So really a very fantastic story. So now we will get into some more discussion with Volker. We have received questions from audience ahead of time. But we will also be opening to any new questions from the group that's in the room today and also online. So with you, if I may, Volker, talk a bit more about the pandemic center. How do you envision it will strengthen our ability to protect the health of Canadians? And what else is needed to realize the vision for the pandemic center? Although I understand some funding and some support is in place.
Right. So what we're doing right now is we're building a number of things. So number one, we're building an in-house manufacturing facility, as I just showed. And so what that does, it enables you quickly to develop or manufacture the clinical grade material that then goes into these human clinical trials. So when you make vaccines, whatever you manufacture, you know, with the big companies, the Pfizers of the world do, has to be developed in a process that early on is developed and then locked in. And so for that, you need pilot scale manufacturing facilities that can quickly make thousands or even a few millions of doses, which then can go into this clinical trials. And so that is one thing we're building right now. If we had that, our vaccine would have been out 6 months earlier, and the 6 months actually are now more at 12 months, because then, you know, everything slows down. As people are getting vaccinated, it's more difficult to find volunteers and all these things, right? So if you wanted to rapidly respond, you need to have the ability to make vaccines in-house. The other thing is we're building a new animal facility that will be able to house a wide range of exotic species, bats, for example, reptiles, insects, all these species that from which pathogens jump into humans. And so again, if you wanted to find quickly solutions for it, you have to be able to house these animals and house them all year round so that you don't start ordering them, procuring them when the disease is already at your doorsteps. You have to have them before. And the last part that goes into the pandemic center is to upgrade to the highest level of containment so that we are able to work with any pathogen, whatever it is in the future, to rapidly make the solutions. And so those are the infrastructure requirements. Lastly, and probably the most important, is to find the world's best scientists to work in this facility so that we can come up with the world's best solutions. And so those are the things that we're doing right now.
Thank you very much. You did refer in passing to the trials which are taking place in Uganda. That brings me to something that Canadians are very proud of. We always go out to help those who are in need, wherever they might be in the world. So here is a story that the many countries in the world, the developing countries, they're struggling in accessing vaccines for COVID-19. And could you please talk as to what role VIDO can play in this regard, so that Canada can continue to help those who are in most need at this point?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the technology that we're currently developing is ideal for developing countries, but it's also ideal for remote areas, even in Canada, in Saskatchewan, Alberta. So it has the ease of transportation, it has the ease of storage and so on. And so I'm very pleased this announcement that I made there, a half made at the end, is really about that. So CEPI is the world's leading organization focused on low and middle income countries and providing technologies to these countries. And by partnering with CEPI, we will be able to take our vaccine into Africa, work with a few countries in Africa to eventually take our vaccine, make it available to African countries.
Thank you for that. One of the last questions before we go to the audience would be the communication and the media attention that has occurred because of the COVID on everything scientific we do. Could you speak to some misconceptions that are out there related to vaccines or role of science in protecting us? Anything that comes to your mind that you would like to speak to today?
Well, I think we all have realized that depending on what news outlet you're watching, you're following, the information varies a lot. And so I think as a scientist, that's probably the most frustrating part in all of this. The rumors that are out there around the safety of the vaccine, starting from injecting tracking devices so that we can monitor where you're going to, the safety, the adverse reactions, the third eye that might grow, all these things. it's just frustrating to see how some people or some newslets are just using this for the popularity to get people to just, subscribe. And I think in all of that, that's probably to me the most frustrating, how we have shifted from a society who recognizes the importance of a problem and all comes together to address it. We're now breaking into groups and everybody has their own little goal in mind. And so I think as a country, Canada is doing much better than other countries for sure, but that's going to be an issue for the world in the future.
Thank you for that. Now let's see, any questions from the audience, please.
What's the strategy or what are the challenges of bringing the world's best researchers to Saskatoon, and what's the pitch? And I think it's all about the vision, the momentum, and what we're building right now. My vision for this is really to build one of the best places in the world, and people go where the best work happens, especially researchers. And as long as we create the environment for them to do what they like the best, which is exciting science, groundbreaking science that is looking into the future, right? As long as we can offer their spouses and their families in equal opportunity, I think Saskatoon will be able to bring the world's best researchers. And we have, right? I mean, some of us are coming from other countries, and just recently we hired a couple of international scientists. Thank you.
Saskatchewan is having its moment in the sun when it comes to all the great things the world needs: food, energy sources, fertilizers. It is being mined in this area. And our job is to add value to that, make it more productive, profitable for Canadian producers. And the intersection of the science with the private sector is something that can make it happen. Really great story developing in the prairies and specifically in Saskatchewan for the years to come. So I think people would come. And my pitch to everybody is, we have Dr. Gertz, come. So that's, as a friend, I would tell everyone. Other questions, please. Yes, sir. Are we using synchrotron for any of the research focus?
Yeah, so we do research with them together around imaging, understanding disease. So looking, for example, at lungs and how, when an infection takes place, how the host responds to it, how these changes happen and so on. In fact, we're now with this vision of even upgrading to the highest level of becoming Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research. We're looking at mechanisms of directly taking animals out of containment, imaging them in the CLS, and then bringing them back into containment, and all in a safe way so that we don't release any pathogens. But there is lots of interactions going on. Yeah.
Power of the synchrotron is that we can take a live animal and image it many times over the period when the disease develops. So it's great to have it next door to Vido, right on campus. We are about to do a major upgrade of the synchrotron in the coming 12 months as well. So good story developing there as well. Other questions? Do we have anything from online audience?
So there is some viruses that are more prone to jump species than others. So it is possible to somewhat predict the families. And I think before the pandemic, if you asked around, most people would have said it's either a coronavirus or a morbillivirus or a flu virus. And so there is certain viruses that have those characteristics. At the end of the day, though, what we're looking for right now is, what are the similarities in these families? What can we focus on in terms of making a vaccine so that even if we get a coronavirus that is completely new, our vaccine will still protect against it. And even if it's not 95%, can you imagine it was something like 80%? We could have 50 million doses of the vaccine sitting in Geneva. A new disease pops up, airplane takes off, lands, 50 million doses, you can vaccinate all the people in that area. The disease will never spread around the globe like COVID has. We don't have to worry about pushing it back. We can try to contain it and control it, slow it down right there until maybe more effective vaccines are available. Maybe we don't even need them. But the whole idea is you want these vaccines available when the outbreak occurs and not a year or 2 years later.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So there is differences between SARS-2 and SARS-1. They all are coronaviruses, right? And so I think what we need to learn from this is that these diseases happen and they will happen in the future. And it's just a matter of time before the next one is. Think back about the last decade. So we had SARS-1, we had Zika, we had MERS, we had swine flu, we had the pandemic flu, and now we have SARS-2. So what is that? 6 diseases in 12 years. And that is going to continue like that. We are very fortunate, and I know this sounds terrible, what I'm going to say right now, but MERS, so another coronavirus, its mortality rate is significantly higher than SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. So MERS can kill as many as 30% of infected people. So we could have had a pandemic where potentially 20% of the population dies from MERS, right? And that is just chance. It's a random event where these mutations happen. So we need to think about what are the families of pathogens from which these new diseases emerge, and what can we do today to prevent that from happening tomorrow.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
No, so gain of function is really to experiment and see if you can make a virus to jump artificially into a new species, right? So we're not doing that. We have no plans on doing that. And even those facilities that were accused of doing that, many of them have not done that. So we have no plans of doing gain of function research. What we're doing is looking at the various coronaviruses. So, you know, cattle have coronaviruses, pigs have coronaviruses. Vito made a coronavirus vaccine for a new disease of pigs within a year. It was in like 6 years ago. So these coronaviruses happen in all, or we all have them. Humans have them, animals have them. And so you can look into the similarities between this one here, this one here, this one here, this one here. So within that round, where your new pathogen is coming from. And as long as your vaccine protects, there's a very good chance it will protect against the one in the middle too.
Thank you. While we are thinking about this jumping of the bugs between animals and humans and so forth, could you talk about the concept of One Health, which you have been advocate of for a while?
And so have you.
Well,
so Baljeetan actually ran one of the training programs at the University of Saskatchewan for One Health, infectious diseases with a One Health focus. And so One Health really relates to the connectiveness, the interconnectiveness between human, animal, and environmental health. And COVID-19 is just a prime example. These diseases jump from animals into humans, back into animals. They live in wildlife species. And with us, reducing the habitat for our species, wildlife species around the world, these interactions will become more frequent in the future. And we will see more diseases coming or emerging from this interface of human and animal health. And so One Health addresses it all. It allows us to understand how animals and humans respond in similar ways to these diseases, and we can use them to learn and inform our next steps.
Thank you. Marcy, do we have? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, actually. So there is what we call epigenetics, so a response of our genetic makeup to the environment and the factors of the environment. It doesn't happen within one generation, so it's not a quick adaptation, but over generations, that's what happens. And so the closer we come in contact with wildlife species and the more they adapt to the urban environment, the more likely there is for them to even genetically adapt to that.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Sure.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we do. There's lots at both at the university, but also at other universities, researchers that are addressing critical questions to us. And as I just said early on, I mean, as a pure research scientist who's focused on vaccines, what came to a complete surprise to me is that some people don't want to use the vaccines, right? And this is where social sciences need to come in. What we can do in the lab doesn't mean it's the best. I mean, the technology may be the best vaccine, but it doesn't mean that people will use it. And this is where we're working with the social sciences will allow us, again, for the future to incorporate into our research those things that we need to do to get people to use our technologies.
Thank you. If I may follow up with a question, Volker. You have done more than 250 interviews, and that's a great service to our country to talk about science. And video scientist Dr. Calvin is going to be on Nature of Things documentary. Could you talk about the role that video plays in this public space by talking about evidence-based science and the impact of that on Canadians when they make decisions? And the second question is, what more can be done in that space to engage Canadians with the science that we do?
Yeah, so it's an important thing for video researchers to participate in all of these activities. All of our scientists are willing to take on interviews, talk about the science, trying to address some questions like you had tonight. I think that's an important role for an organization like VIDO to play, to make sure that the right information, the proper, the unbiased information gets out there. And so again, what is needed in the future, I think the more dialogue we have in the future, the better for all of us. What we probably need is better spokespeople for us. You know, these dry scientists like myself, we're just not the ones that are on Facebook or in the media. You know, they're attractive to people. It's all about sensation these days. So hearing about this one event somewhere, which was a proposed vaccine that killed somebody, gets more attraction than all the thousands of lives we have saved, if not millions of lives we have saved with the vaccines. And so this is what I think we all need to change, how we stop watching the sensational news and get back to watching the real news. And I think this is where we need, again, the social science people who can much better relay our story than a dry scientist can.
Follow up on that. Here's a simple question. Could we engage some young students from high schools to make videos on how does mRNA works, how does DNA works, how do you make vaccines out of them, which are sensational, but they portray real science?
So there's lots of exciting stuff going on. So I go to high schools, for example, I meet with kids, I ask or answer all these questions that they have. They are looking at, you know, creative ways of showcasing what we're doing. We don't currently, you're right, we don't have a student who's doing videos right now, but it's certainly something for the future to think about, for sure.
Not just summer high school student program.
Yeah, there you go.
That. I mean,
That's right.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
More questions from the audience, please.
So biocontainment 4 is really the highest level of containment, and it allows us to, in the future, respond to any disease. And that's why we want to do it. We have no plans on establishing big research programs in Ebola or other diseases. What this allows us is to be able to respond to any new disease in the future. And that's the goal, that's the vision for this facility.
I also would like to talk about the group within the university that does create these events to engage with the community which is outside of the university. Alumni, people who are interested in what University of Saskatchewan does. whether it is developing vaccines, producing the food that the world needs, ensuring that the snow melt in the Rockies flows into South Saskatchewan River, feeds into the irrigation projects in the prairies. And with the government, when we need to make a request for investment at the University of Saskatchewan, Dr. Deborah Pazega Osborne's team with many colleagues here, I won't name all of them because I will miss somebody. They are really the connector of leaders like Dr. Gertz with the community which is outside. And they play a very vital role in taking the information out and talking about the things we need to protect the health of the Canadian, our economic enterprise, and our socio-economic well-being in this country. So I really commend the work that Deborah, you and your team do in organizing an event like this, creating this beautiful space for us to congregate. And so really, I'm sure Volker and I are very grateful for the work that occurs within your team. And I'm sure whenever Dr. Gertz and his team has news to share with all of you, it will come through Deborah's team, through multiple channels that the university has. So thank you so very much. I will pass it over to Dr. Pazega Osborne to close today's event.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's outstanding. I could never let my colleague, Dr. Singh, have the last word. So I'm just going to say a couple of things. One is to thank you all for being here. Second is to repeat those two key points that are just sitting on my shoulder here, Dr. Gertz, which is you can't train the firefighters after the fire has started. And we must get ahead of the next one. We must get ahead of the next one. I have full confidence, as I hope all of you do, that under Dr. Gertz's leadership, we will do just that. I want to thank you for being here today. Your flight leaves in an hour, so you might just want to hustle a little bit here, but I hope all of you can join me in thanking my two colleagues here and the others in the room who have taken their time to bring us all together. And I want to thank you for being here. It's remarkable the support you bring to this university, whether you're in our space here or in the virtual spaces. We're grateful for your support and have a good evening.
We are one of Canada's largest research organizations focused on infectious diseases, both affecting humans and animals, and really during the pandemic have become one of Canada's go-to places for COVID-19 research. VIDO currently operates Canada's largest high containment laboratory. It's one of the country's major science infrastructures, and it has allowed us to rapidly respond to COVID-19. We have been able, within 12 months, to work with more than 80 companies. We were the first in the country to isolate the virus, the first in the country to establish an animal model, and now we're the first university organization to have a vaccine in clinical trials. Everybody has stepped up during the pandemic and really contributed to VIDO's success and the accomplishments we have made over the last year.
I knew this was a problem I could not solve on my own. My expertise is in human respiratory viruses in the ferret model. I'm really grateful that VIDO Intervac has given us a home to do our research right now, and that's not only given me a place to work on SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, but it's given a training opportunity to the future generation of scientists. You need to be highly trained and you need your staff to know how to work with these pathogens, but you also need the facilities. So you need the actual rooms to be built properly with the right airflow. So VIDO Intervac has both.
Much like a fire department, we need to have infrastructure and trained firefighters in place to be able to rapidly respond to these diseases as they emerge. We're currently constructing a biomanufacturing facility that will allow us to manufacture vaccines and therapeutics right here in Saskatoon. And we're also seeing VIDO become a key center in Canada dealing with emerging infectious diseases of the future. And these will be both affecting humans and animals. And with more than 45 years of expertise in that human-animal interface, VIDO is well positioned with these exciting upgrades to our infrastructure to take on a role as Canada's Centre for Pandemic Research.